And guess who's back again, folks? And this time I actually have a guest this time. So, hey, hello everyone tuning in now or either watching the replay or listening to the audio version later. Welcome to Thru Autistic podcast / videocast in the case of this going live. I'm your host, Christopher D. Casson, and don't mind me, the caffeine is hitting me right now. The caffeine crash. I really need to get rid of the caffeine, honestly, because it's not doing me good. I know it does for others, but not for me. And I'm doing my best to kick the habits, and despite it being so good. But also with us today is also a returning guest this time around. He is Sam Farmer, and he is a neurodiversity community self-advocate, writer, author, public speaker, and a consultant for Floreo. Am I saying that right?
Correct, yes.
Yep, and it's a company that leverages virtual reality technology and teaching social communication and other life skills for neurodiverse individuals. He was diagnosed later in life with autism, and because of that, he now writes blogs and articles, records coaching videos and podcasts, such as appearing in this podcast now for the second time, and presents at conferences and support groups, sharing stories and thoughts as to one can achieve greater happiness through the face of challenges and adversities, which we're kind of going through now a lot in recent years. And his book that he authored is called A Long Walk Down the Winding Road, Small Steps, Challenges, and Triumphs Through an Autistic Lens. So thank you again so much for deciding to join me as my first guest of the year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be back.
Yep, and excuse me. So it's drying out because I'm living now in the second driest state in the nation right now.
Okay. Yeah.
But at the same time, it's a lot easier to deal with this heat right now when it's dry rather than humid. So perks, cons, that's just how life goes. So for those joining the podcast for the very first time that haven't seen the first episode with you, why don't you describe what your life was, growing up not knowing about being on the autistic spectrum until much later in life? Because for me, for instance, I ended up getting diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome at around the age of 5 or 6. So for me, it was pretty early, but for you, it was later. So why don't you share your experience with that?
So basically, Chris, I was fortunate in the sense that even though I didn't know I was autistic for the first 40 years of my life, I did know about my learning disability, which was diagnosed just shy of age 3. And because of the learning disability diagnosis, I was able to benefit from a special education. I was actually kept back a year. I graduated high school when I was 19 years old. In retrospect, I think that was a huge blessing to have been granted an extra year to get through grade school. So I was the beneficiary of those kinds of services and accommodations, which did make a difference. But without a diagnosis around autism, I was contending with a multitude of unanswered questions that I couldn't explain. I had no explanation for questions like, why is dating such a hardship? Why is it so challenging to function properly in loud environments amidst crowds of people? Why was it harder, it seemed, for me to make friends than most of my peers? Those kinds of questions, which the Asperger's diagnosis like what you were diagnosed with, helped answer.
Mm.
But it took a long time, had to wait quite a while.
Well, like you said, better late than never, right? Because
Correct.
at least now you have that, you at least have a starting point of how you can learn more about yourself instead of
Correct.
when I find that when a lot of people get that diagnosis, sometimes they kind of get stuck in the mud and thinking that they're limited like this. That was kind of what it was for me at first, especially hitting myself hard with that. But eventually you just have to, you know, learn to let go of just being so clingy to a label. And speaking of that, part of this topic is more about the label of being called a disability per se. So, and what brought about that discussion with you and me before we started airing this was an experience you had that gave you a different viewpoint of this disability label. So, what was? Could you repeat for the audience, those that are listening now and listening later, of what exactly was that story that brought about this topic that made you have that question about that label? And especially since you also told me that you said that the label is also a regrettable tongue tied, a regrettable necessity. Um, and from now, how you could also please explain what you mean by a regrettable necessity.
So the regrettable necessity interpretation is at this point outdated, really because of a transformation that I underwent. That transformative things can happen when you listen to the opinions and learn about the lived experiences of other neurodivergent individuals. There's a flourishing neurodiversity community on LinkedIn in particular, and social media.
Okay.
And I write in my book, consistent with my lived experiences when I was young, that the disability label is problematic because if you take that in and you let it get under your skin, it can compromise self-esteem.
Right.
It can get in the way of efforts that you might be making towards learning how to love who you are. And I struggled with the disability label in the wake of my learning disability diagnosis in that regard. It made me feel different in ways that I didn't want to be different from most of my peers. Being a special education student where most of my peers were not made me stick out in ways I didn't want to stick out.
Right. You wanted to be, yeah, you just wanted to be considered that label of normal, quote unquote.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And I was rebelling against a key aspect of who I am. And because the diagnosis happened just shy of 3 years old, I was very, very young. I was vulnerable. There was a part of me with respect to autism, a big part of me that I didn't even know about. That as a result of that, I attributed the disability label in those days to what I would call the medical model of disability, as opposed to the social model, whereby the medical model states that disability is intrinsic. Like if you're diagnosed, for example, with autism, by definition, you intrinsically are disabled, which I no longer subscribe to. The
Yeah.
social model, by contrast, attributes disability more to external factors, external influences.
Yeah,
Which,
internal. So like internal with the medical
yeah,
diagnosis, and for the social, it's more external of how people perceive it. Is that correct?
whereby,
Hmm.
as an autistic individual, it's certain things going on in the greater society that make me feel disabled,
Right.
whereby if I'm given the proper accommodations and supports that help me be at my best, I move from feeling disabled to empowered
Hmm.
because of external factors. Growing up, I was bullied.
Yeah.
Bullying is an external phenomenon that obviously has a very, very profound effect on the individual being bullied. Decisions were made by other people as to where I would go to school, that I would be a special education student, that I would get this accommodation and that accommodation, and I would have this, but I wouldn't have that. Those were decisions made for me by other people. That reinforced that I'm a disabled individual, which I struggled with up until very recently, until I learned, largely from the neurodiversity community on LinkedIn, that I think I'm looking at this all wrong. And in thinking and ruminating on people's responses to a post that I made about what do you think about the disability label among other labels with respect to who you are and what you're going through. And overwhelmingly, many of them said, I'm proud to be called disabled. I wear it proudly. I don't feel like the problem is me. I feel like the problem is external factors that contribute to me feeling like I'm disabled. And again, when given the appropriate accommodations and supports, I feel empowered. I don't feel disabled. It's a state of mind. There are different ways that you can look at things. And so there you have it.
Yeah.
Medical
So
model versus social model, et cetera.
yeah, and there's a lot to think about, and I'm trying to get my brain to focus
Yes,
here. So,
I understand.
so
It
apologies
took
if
me
I'm
some
taking a
time to
pause.
digest as well.
Yeah. So you know, as you mentioned in the LinkedIn, which I didn't know there were autism groups in LinkedIn. I was always looking at Facebook, but you said some embrace it, but I'm assuming there might be some that don't. And what are
Correct.
you feeling? And what are your feelings on why they feel like some embrace it while some others are really rejecting that notion? What's your opinion from what you observed and talked to them on why that is?
It all depends on your lived experiences. Not long ago, I attributed the disability label to the medical model the way others do today. I had my reasons for interpreting the label in that light as a regrettable necessity, past tense now, that the neurodiversity community and the autism spectrum are so remarkably diversified with respect to the different types of challenges that we face, with respect to our strengths and our talents and our unique attributes, our life experiences, that in any diversified community, you're going to have dissent. You're going to have certain people feeling one way and certain people feeling another way. In my view, this is not about right versus wrong, or if you don't believe the way I believe, then you're in the wrong. No,
Yeah.
it's, to me, there is legitimacy to looking at it in these two ways. And it all stems from lived experiences.
Yeah, it's about different perspectives based on
Correct.
everything you've
Yeah.
gone through in life, just like with, those that deal with different social issues that are not that are neurotypicals, that are making their own judgments based on their own experiences, but at times they tend to almost like reject others as if they're not important when they're just as valid. If
Yeah.
you really bother to look deep within, think about, you know, what did this person experience that I didn't, that maybe could really enlighten me a little bit. And from what you've been discussing so far, that was something that you experienced. Because with me, with my limited experience with some autism groups and on Facebook, there are some that are thinking of autism as a superpower, while there are others that are wishing they were quote unquote cured of it because it gives them so much grief
Correct.
of it.
Perfect example of how there is inevitably dissent in our community, which is fine. Dissent
Yeah.
is a part of life. Multiple perspectives, multiple viewpoints on a given label or on a given issue is inevitable. It's part of
Yeah.
life, it's intrinsic to the human experience. And I think one thing that enabled me to make this transformation, Chris, from attributing my disability more to the medical model, whereas now I'm more aligned with the social model, is that for a long, long time, I worked very hard to build self-esteem. I was very, very fortunate to have worked with clinicians who helped me get there, to have had the parents that I had who did a whole lot of things to help position me for future happiness and success while they were raising me. And so, in building up my sense of self and my sense of inner strength, perhaps that enabled me in some way to make this transition to looking differently at my disability, where I no longer view it as a regrettable necessity. I now feel comfortable saying, yeah, I'm disabled. Whereas prior, I would avoid that label.
Yeah.
And I reinterpreted my learning disability diagnosis as a learning difference. That was my
Good
way
point.
of avoiding the disability label earlier. Look at it as a learning difference. Words matter.
Yeah.
So that helped me for a while. But now I'm back to being perfectly comfortable saying, yeah, learning disability, various challenges or disabilities connected to my autism profile. And when you listen to other people, when you really take the words of other people to heart, transformative things can sometimes happen.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back of the contrast with what I grew up, because I went to all kinds of different schools leading up to third grade. It was like every year it was a different school, with the kindergarten being at like a special ed school completely dedicated to that area. But then I kept eventually went to one in third grade where let's just say they really needed a lot of improvements for the special ed, and I did have like a teacher's aide following me around helping me out. But at the same time, by the time I got to college, with my father, well, at the time my mother passed away when I was in high school, unfortunately, that she was also considered disabled since she had post polio and scoliosis.
I,
But at the same time, when I was going in, going into that, I just kept thinking, you know, I wanted to be like everyone else. I didn't want to be like, I'm trying to figure out what the word is.
You didn't want to be perhaps the real you. The real you. You were trying to be maybe what you thought other people wanted you to be. What do
Well,
you think?
actually, I was starting to getting more of like, I want to have my independent streak kind of thing, where I
Okay.
didn't want to keep depending on systems and whatnot. I just wanted to, I felt like I wanted to show my worth, but at the same time, my self-esteem was so low that it was quite a struggle, along with all kinds of other things that had me depressed and getting a little bit on the suicidal side. Since I might as well want to admit that, but
Well, that takes
so
great courage to admit to that, Chris. Good for
yeah,
you. It takes great courage to admit to that.
yeah, and I guess I kind of came early with the thought of, I'm guessing possibly from always helping my late mother out, since she's been like crutches and like an electric scooter since she was like maybe 5 years old. So for me, it's like, yeah, I can help out a lot, but also at the same time, you have to respect their, despite that disability label and how we tend to think of that as, oh, they're being helpless. You know, they want to be able to feel like they can have some independence as well, instead of
Yes.
having people thinking that because of that label that they need every kind of help, even though we just assume just from looks that they need help in every single way, when make that wrong assumption when maybe they want to have that sense of respect, I guess you could say. So, you know,
I agree with
I'm kind of,
you. Not always do we necessarily want help. We want that independence and to be able to prove it, that we can do certain things on our own. So I agree. I think often we're taught, do the polite thing, help somebody out if they appear to maybe need it. And I've
yeah,
often defaulted to that behavior, with it not really occurring to me until more recently that in doing so, maybe I'm encroaching upon this individual's efforts at being independent.
yeah,
And I don't want to get in the way of that. I want to be
yeah,
empowering towards other people. I don't want to be encroaching upon their independence.
yeah. So, since you
Yes.
mentioned that recent experience, could you tell us more about it? And along with that, you know, does this, it feels like almost like a stigma of being called disabled, making people feel less than, with how we
Yeah.
think we're helping them when we're actually doing the exact opposite mentally. And how much of it do you think is influenced by just society's stereotypes based on that label?
Society's stereotypes is a perfect example of what I referred to earlier as an external disabling influence. Um, there are very few things, if anything, that are more disabling than stigma, than feeling like you're being marginalized, that you're being pathologized, uh, that stigma is absolutely a disabling factor. And the challenge at hand, I think, is to try to rise above it and to recognize that, look, the stigma is an external factor that's beyond my control. I'm either going to let it keep me down or I'm going to try to rise above it. I have always tried to rise above it, to bring forth my true, genuine self, to exercise my capacity for independence, to be proud of who I am in spite of the fact that in the past I've been labeled as disabled, that I've been labeled as autistic. Hey, I embrace all of it, because if I don't embrace those descriptors, then how can I possibly accept who I am? And how can I feel good about my sense of self if I haven't even achieved self-acceptance? Shortly after I was diagnosed as autistic, it dawned on me, look, learn what you can about this, accept and embrace this as being a core part of who you are, because you're better off embracing these things about you than to be rebelling against them, as I did when I was younger.
Yeah.
And that is the key to learning how to love yourself, as I write in my book.
Yeah,
Self-acceptance is a critical ingredient to learning how to love who you are.
Yeah, and what was I going to say? Hold on, just filtering through all this.
Take your time.
Yep, you definitely got plenty of time. So, and I guess that's where I kind of went in a different direction when I was lightly looking into the whole autism thing, because I almost kind of use that as an excuse to beat myself up, actually.
Yeah.
Because I thought I was limited by this, and
yeah,
be perfectly frank, I wasn't really. I was just dealing with so much stuff, such as frequent deaths in the family and close friends, which felt like almost yearly, and as well as the stress of all the traits I'm dealing with and trying to figure out who I am, while also dealing with family drama. I'm just going to leave it at that, because that's kind of private right now.
Yep.
With let's just say that I've dealt with, we're not going to get into politics because this is not the episode for that, but
yes,
I've dealt with both the far left and the far right, basically, and found that both of those extremist sides pretty much suck. And I'm better off going the middle path of learning to decide for my own instead of having either side decide for me, such as with one saying that I need to stick with like disability from the government, and that I should never, just go for it with wanting to make a lot more with my life, with making tons of money, that I need to stick with this because it's the safe way. And that's kind of, and I got really, really pissed at that, because it felt like there was multiple reasons, but one of them just felt like, you gotta stick to that label kind of thing. And that's part of, the stigma and the meaning of that, I guess you could say.
And it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
To rise above stigma. It's easy to say it on a podcast, but it's hard,
stigma.
Arduous work.
Yeah.
Which took me many, many years. It took me the better part of my life to get to where I am today in terms of my sense of self. But what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
As you work through all these challenges and difficulties, in a way, it strengthens you.
Yeah, especially since right now I keep thinking I'm not exactly the greatest at conversations, which is partially why I'm doing a podcast to improve that, but always when to interject without acting all rude and interrupting kind of thing. So I'm trying to get back in the gist of it right now, since it's been over a year because of moving to a new place and all that, which definitely took a lot due to, that play it safe that gets stuck in their head by society as well. On top of that, when you really think of it, instead of just going for it. And I'm trying to think of where I was going with this, but right there we go. There we go. Light bulb.
Yeah.
Light bulb. Eventually, I knew that question would come back, but you found your way, but for others, they may be listening to this podcast and thinking, well, how do I start mine right now, of figuring out how to get out of that one mindset to another? What's the best way to start around this, to go beyond that stigma and that what people tend to think of when they think disability, that you end up adopting while still learning and growing from a young age? How can we get past that?
This is a big reason why I wrote my book, A Long Walk Down a Winding Road. First and foremost, I wrote it to be a self-help book. Even though there are a lot of stories of lived experiences in terms of the memoir aspect of the book, it mixes that with self-help content, where among the very, very fortunate ones to have faced the kinds of challenges and adversities that I have faced and still managed to be happy and successful in life. That where not everybody is as fortunate as I have been, write this book, put it out into the world, and hopefully at least some of the readers of it find nuggets of truth in there that maybe can be used to carve out greater happiness in life.
Yeah, could you
And
give
there's a lot in that.
Could you give like a brief example from that book of one?
So in my
possible?
mind, the most important chapter in the book is kind of a little bit of what we've been talking about here, Chris, which is learning how to love myself. In other words, it's a chapter that deals with self-esteem building. And it gives a bunch of pointers that helped me to get there that maybe could help others. Things like how an optimistic frame of mind helps, how unrealistic expectations of oneself and of others can really bring you down because it sets you up for failure.
Yeah.
I talk a lot of what I've mentioned earlier in this podcast about self-acceptance and how I was able to achieve that aspect of the self-esteem building process. I talk about the importance of surrounding yourself with good, smart, intelligent, kind people,
Right.
because the people with whom you associate can arguably either make you or break you. Just to give a few examples of what I've learned over the course of my almost 54 years on this planet.
You're 54?
Yeah, in June.
Well, this year I'm actually going to be 38. So there we go.
So this is why I wrote the book. It gets into specifics of what worked for me. But the thing is that what works for me may work for others, might not work for other people. It's a mixed bag. All I can do is offer up what I can based on my own lived experiences and what has worked for me. And hopefully the book can help at least a subset of the people who read it, assuming that their motive is to get ideas on how to carve out better lives for themselves. I talk about social skills acquisition, social competency, rising above bullying, self-esteem building, workplace success, what I would call marriaging or being a good spouse, and parenting, both from the perspective of me as a father to my son who is also autistic, as well as from the point of view of me as a son to my parents and what I recall of all the things that they did right to position me for future happiness and success, to offer that kind of wisdom, ideas and insights that hopefully can help at least a few of the folks who read the book.
Yeah, so speaking of parenting, I have talked to a few parents that just figuring out more about the child, and especially one that is looking more towards wanting to be more independent and whatnot. So what advice would you give, parents of autistic kids that kind of want to, kind of thinking of going beyond that disability label? What should they do to really help with their support?
Well, as hard as this may be to do, because of the stigma that hangs over our community, try to encourage your kids to be who they are, to be true to themselves. And that can be easier said than done when, in being who you are, you may be bullied, you may be stigmatized or marginalized. But as difficult as it might be to do, it's of the utmost importance. Because if you try to fix what you perceive as broken, then you're sending a message to your child that they are broken and need to be fixed. And that'll get in the way of their sense of self and self-esteem. And if it continues that way, then in my view, they're not going to find true, complete happiness and success in life if that's the message they're being sent. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with socialization and communication and behavioral expectations in society that were not written with you in mind.
Yeah.
You talk about external factors that can disable somebody. It's those societal expectations around socialization, communication, behavior, whatever else, that can very easily become disabling forces. Allow your child to be who they are, and try to see things from their point of view.
Right.
Try to immerse yourself in the things that they get immersed in. Try to step into their world and be cognizant of their sensitivities, whether sensory or otherwise, which is all too common among those of us on the spectrum.
Yep.
Sensory sensitivities,
yep.
All kinds of sensitivities, to be cognizant of those. So those are a few thoughts.
Yeah, and I also think of, getting them to inch out of their comfort zone little by little, because that's kind of how I did it. Part of it was from, getting into those strong interests I have, such as, for example, they were struggling to figure out how to get me to interact with other kids, but then I was a 90s child, and, the whole Pokemon craze, Pokemon cards, I was collecting like crazy, and was just so willing to actually go to these local tournaments. And they were like, okay, we need to get this kid we need to get our child these booster boxes every Christmas. Come on, let's keep encouraging this. So,
yep.
And that's definitely one of the more positive things that both my parents have done to me. Just give a little bit more of an encouragement to keep exploring instead of settling for things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, with everything you experience now with all this, how about we reiterate on how would you now identify that label of disability with all this in mind now?
So it's a mixed bag,
Hmm.
as many things in life are. There's the good and the bad and everything in between of how you look at it. But the way I look at it now is maybe kind of like a badge of honor. So if you want to call me disabled, fine. I'll wear it like a badge of honor, as if to say, look, I don't view myself as being intrinsically disabled. It's because of external forces beyond my control that often make me feel as though I am disabled. And that's kind of how I look at it now, as a badge of honor, and in accordance with the social model of disability. Whereas I used to look at it more from the perspective of the medical model, that it's me. The disability is intrinsic to me. I just no longer look at it that way.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So it all depends on how you look at things. My point of view, some will agree with it, others won't, and that's fine. But that's what works for me today. This outlook would not have worked for me growing up. My experiences being learning disabled had a lot to do with that. But it's a different outlook now, because you live, you learn, you grow. In this case, you listen to others in your community. You take in how they feel about their disability. You learn that many of them, not all of them, but many of them, have no problem at all with the label. And it took a while for me to get there, but I did. At this point, I don't take issue with it, but that's me.
Yeah.
That's one
Different
individual's opinion. Some agree with me, others don't, and that's fine.
Yeah, so now that we talk about how it's a bit of a society kind of viewpoint there, so how can people that are not on the autistic spectrum, how can we just make things more inclusive, I guess you could say, with people that are under that label of disabled? Now that we have gone through all this, what can society do to change up a bit that you view needs to be changed?
Great question, Chris. I believe, as others do, that listening, ideally empathizing with the lived experiences of those of us who do acknowledge disability for ourselves, and then in response to that, being more accommodating, being more supportive, learning about us from us, rather than to be learning about us from those who don't walk in our shoes. But learning about it from people who live it and breathe it every day, people like you and me.
Yeah.
We need to be the ones who are listened to, because we live with this every day and have, in our cases, for really the entirety of our lives up to now. So it's listening, it's empathizing, it's being accommodative and supportive, so that we can feel at our best and feel more empowered than disabled. External influences, that's what society can do. Society can choose to be more empowering than disabling. kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, I think that's also another thing, that positive thing my mother did. My late mother, she ended up coming across some books by Temple Grandin. You and me both know about her, autism advocate, and she also started sharing the books with the special ed teacher in elementary school, and just trying to
Yep.
figuring me out. And I think that was a huge thing, since with the school I went to, they were more concerned about sports, and also raising enough funds, since it was both elementary, middle, and high school in the same small building, so they really needed
I
a new
understand.
one. But at the same time, that's also mean less money to help the people in the disability class, such as when we usually have like a general morning class, like for 30 minutes before going about our day. And this, at least from my experience with the special ed during like middle and high school, it was like one teacher with like 20 students in the class that she's supposed to somehow help all of them and within like a 30-minute time frame, which is just that it's not exactly the most workable thing, if you get what I mean. That to the point where the aide that was following me also had to help her out, just to be able to do the best they can to help everyone out, and not just me. So I've heard they've gotten a lot better since I left. Since, let's just say, the society type of thing at that school was not exactly the most positive. That got my parents and them back and forth, even to the point where I remember they were thinking of talking to a lawyer, actually, because of
Yep.
it. But eventually they straightened out, because apparently, the special ed teacher in elementary went to my dad a little bit after I graduated from high school and left, and said, "Thank God your mother did what she did, because apparently after I left, there were 5 more autistic kids that went into the school with
Yep.
equally as protective parents. So if they didn't shape up, then they would be in a lot of trouble." So now, because of that, apparently, if I remember correctly, their special ed is actually award winning right now in the area. So it's just
Wonderful.
a matter of, even though you're dealing with a lot of strife from society, keep pushing forward, because you're doing it for future disabled kids, so that they don't have to go through what we did, that
Indeed.
wasn't as
I agree.
possible. Yeah, definitely.
And
So
no
we're
better
getting,
than Temple Grandin's books. I
yeah,
mean, that's an example of learning from somebody who walks in these shoes
mm,
as a self-advocate, among the greats to advocate for our community and all she's done. Those are the voices you want to listen to and empathize with, and perhaps use as a catalyst for change for the better,
yeah,
in
definitely.
becoming more inclusive and cultivating greater equity, greater equality, etc. Yeah.
Right. And of course, one of the other ways is also to read your book and learn more about you. So since we are kind of getting towards the end of this episode, why don't you tell us how people can contact you to learn more about you, more about your book, and so forth. Especially with, I also recognize that you also have a newsletter called the Spectrum Wisdom as well. So why
I
don't
no
you tell more
longer
about
call
that?
it Spectrum Wisdom
Oh,
in the subject line, but it can still be looked at that way. But you can go to samfarmerauthor.com. Again, that's samfarmerauthor.com. There you can sign up for my mailing list. People on my mailing list are the first to find out about newly published articles, about newly published podcasts and videos like this one, etc. Events, author talks, both in person and virtual. and just links to a whole bunch of this kind of media content. And also to learn more about the book, to buy the book, either as an ebook or a paperback, if you so choose. And people can contact me on the contact page at samfarmerauthor.com as well. Reach out about anything, questions, comments, whatever. And I promise I'll respond. Not always immediately, depending upon how busy I am at the time,
Yeah.
but I will respond.
So you said, was it like some sort of meetings on Zoom you mentioned? What are those? Is it like a book club or something? Because I know sometimes you have something like that in your newsletter that I'm signed up for, actually.
Well, that's the only newsletter that I have. And they are podcasts and videos of author talks that I've given on a whole wide variety of topics of importance to the neurodiversity community. That when those are published, the people on my mailing list are the first to find out about them. And virtual and in-person author talks, when and where those are happening, and as soon as a new article is published. The mailing list folks are the first to find out about all of that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. And as for more about the podcast and myself, Thru Autistic Eyes does have a Facebook page where this is also broadcasting live, not just YouTube. And we also have a Patreon if anyone decides to give a little support, like a monthly. It's basically the price of like a cup of coffee, $3 per month, just to show you support so we can keep producing these episodes. And of course, my personal stuff with Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, the usual there with CDCASSON creates, CD Casson creates, as well as, my own website. If you want to learn more about this and also look at previous podcast episodes, such as the previous one that Sam Farmer was also one, which was also excellent. And I believe that's about it. Are there any final words you would like to say before we close this up?
Just thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me a second time. This was fun.
Pleasure.
And thanks to all of you who have listened in and who will listen in. Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you for joining me again. It's
sure.
I've been meaning to get this podcast back open, but with so much hectic with moving and all this other
understandable
stuff, but you know what? I'm glad to be back at this again. So for those that are joining us more recently, the next episode actually is about bullying, actually, with my guest Jason Cisneros. And until next time, this is Thru Autistic Eyes with Christopher D. Casson, and can't wait to see you guys next time. So take care everyone.